Assassin's Promise by Thomas Woodward. Chapter 71. Lord Azric watched as his entourage carried him through the flower-carpeted streets of Caliapos. Hundreds of flower petals fluttered in the air. The clamor of people moving and talking excitedly created the feeling of looking through the inside of a winter globe. The glass blowers created the most beautiful, fanciful landscapes with breathtaking care. The images held within the delicate globes of glass could not possibly exist in the real world. As a child, Azric had been enamored of them. He remembered shaking his favorite winter globe and watching with fascination as the tiny snowflakes covered the miniature town that was held within the glass orb. Sometimes he felt like he was trapped within similar walls of glass that he could feel but could not see. The assassin's knife could come at any time. It was becoming a struggle to retain his outward facade of impassive ease. How long would it be until the blade fell? He felt like a caged animal within this city. However, he knew if he were to leave it, it would only open himself up to meeting his end via a group of bandits on the road. It would be much easier to keep things quiet with fewer witnesses. No, by staying here, he increased his chances for survival. He just needed to root out his would-be killers. The race was on, and to unsuspecting onlookers, no one could see the deep moving currents hidden under the water's surface. The motivations remained hidden. The freedom that the 20 days of fire brought could perhaps give him an opportunity to discover those he sought. But he did not know what to look for. The raised glance of a commoner as he passed, was it out of curiosity, or did it hold a darker motive? The man holding his cane by the alley they had just passed. He had looked odd, standing there in fine silks and embossed leather finery. Was he meeting someone? Or had he waited to pass on information about Azric as an informant? Azric's mind spun with possibilities. Names that had been crossed out already. Names of those who currently resided in his dungeons below his keep. For every name his spymasters had crossed out, there were dozens of others that remained as possibilities. He could not watch everyone at once. His treasury was not limitless either. He would have to be aware of the fact that those who employ assassins to kill him would also have strong connections and deeper pockets. As long as he remained in the public eye, he would have a greater measure of safety than the alternative. He needed a third party, someone who was not embroiled in the great game already. He needed someone like Kalian, the heir to a title who had gambled away most of his family's wealth. It was remarkable that he had retained his own family's name given his exploits. Kalian had disdainfully looked upon any and all attempts to return him to credibility. He had hated his father before his death. His mother had been locked away after losing her mind more than a decade before that. With no other heirs, it had fallen to Kalian to take up the family's estate and place among the nobility. But he had rejected all but the wealth. He had managed to drain the family's coffers within a year and left the estate to ruin. If not for Azric's own actions, the estate would have fallen to squatters and bandits. Azric had maintained the grounds, although the estate itself had fallen into severe disrepair, remaining unused for years. Azric had considered retracting Kalian's titles, but ultimately decided against it. In the event, he could use it as future leverage against the man, should he ever return to his senses. That was what Azric envied most about the man, truth be told. His absolute uncaring of ceremony or titles. Kalian used the coin that was at his disposal, but never used the fact of his noble birth as a club to get what he wanted. As a result, he was a force that could not be controlled, a man as chaotic as nature itself. Azric had wanted this freedom in his most base moments. There was an elegance to the simplicity of Kalian's life. He could be bought, perhaps, but never threatened or bullied. This made him perfect to aid Azric's endeavors. He did not believe Kalian would betray him. There was no other person he could say the same of, even taking into account his own direct family members. If anything, some of them would jump at the chance to oust him, regardless of consequence to their physical well-being. No, Kalian was something to be pointed at his goal. Then one could only stand back and watch the chaos as it ensued. There would be no controlling the man once he made a decision. He must be persuaded. There was simply no other way. How best to couch his need? He would need to plan carefully. No one must know of Calian's service to him should he accept it. Keeping servants from being underfoot was an art he had never mastered. They would surely repeat anything they saw or heard, like jabbering puppets, dancing on the string of their master of the moment. Any leave Lord Asric took would be noted. He would be followed and watched, by his own spy master's directive, if not by others. It would need to be a chance encounter. He would need a moment of privacy, but it must not appear staged. Perhaps if he ran into Calian while he was touring the city. During the 20 days of fire, commoners and nobles alike could say anything to one another, no matter how bold or ridiculous. Perhaps if he found himself in the man's company among the blood-red flower-carpeted streets, he would need to arrange a diversion so the news of him speaking to a figure such as Calian was drowned out by the talk of something more exciting. Perhaps a duel, maybe a death. His mind worked, already discarding several possible scenarios before settling on one. If a fallen beam were to crush someone walking nearby as he passed down the street, any conversation he might have with Calian would be forgotten in the news of the ensuing tragedy. He smiled coldly. There was nothing beyond his reach, not here in his center of power. It would take only a few words and it could be made to be so. Now to find the man. The question was, how to pique Calian's interest. It had been years since he had seen his childhood friend, and Asric wondered if he could ask the man's help without a deeper conversation than he was entirely comfortable with. The less people knew of his weakness, the better, but knowing Calian, he would want the whole story. The trick was keeping others from realizing Calian was even in the city, much less that he had intended to meet with the man. Which of his advisors did he least fear giving this dangerous information to? Lord Pelvari was a spineless mouthpiece. Peticulous, a minor lord, was a fool. Lady Eleanor was headstrong and petty, and not particularly experienced in the art of intrigue yet. Her power was too new to her. She was dangerous, though, and more difficult to control than the others. He could not have one of the nobles getting it into their head that they could use the information against him. Then there was Haldon, one of 4 manservants that he kept on retainer. The man had an odd assortment of knowledge, and was good at ferreting out information for him. He could help orchestrate a meeting with Calian, but again, Asric worried at the others who would learn of it. It would be a slight, however small, to send greetings to Calian through an underling bereft of noble birth. Not that Calian cared a fig for ceremony. Asric feared that the others would see too much to gain by holding knowledge of the meeting and store as future blackmail material. They would need to be very careful, of course, for exercising such knowledge at the wrong moment could bring their utter destruction if they miscalculated even a hair. Such was the way of the great game. Even the pale excuse that passed for it here in his city, so far removed from the center of power that he so longed to be a part of again. Perhaps he could enlist a foreign agent to set up the meeting, and then dispose of them after the fact. But that, too, could raise questions. Everything cost coin, and as much as it galled, he had to plan carefully with his coffers. They were not unlimited in bounty, he knew. Deciding on Haldon, he rose from his thoughts to give the order to return to his great keep. The strong men pivoted the pavilion on which he lay and moved to obey. He was trailed by a coterie of bootlickers, all various shades of nobility in name. As they moved up the streets, he saw men in forge-fire red garments breathing flame. They danced and swayed as the people drifted by, then breathed in deeply before releasing a gout of fire just above the heads of the people in the streets. Gasps of awe and fear was the result. A woman stood draped in white, blood-red paint smearing her chin, dripping down her neck. She held a tapered fan in front of her face and stepped in time to the clink of a tambour. Her movements were hypnotic and sure as she swayed seductively before the crowd, amid angry bursts of fire from the red-garbed men. As Asric's pavilion passed, her movements stilled. She lowered her fan for the space of a heartbeat and looked him in the eye. The touching of their eyes was startling and cold. One of the dark-eyed women on his pavilion placed an arm protectively over him. She made an angry expression, staring daggers at the street performer. When he looked again, the performer was swirling her white dress amid the street, the fan firmly in place over her features. Blood-red paint dripped from where she gripped the ornate fan, spilling in rivulets onto the hard cobblestones beneath her feet. Crimson flowers spun madly about as she danced, no longer moving to the beat. The pavilion passed, leaving Azric pensive from the strange moment. Surely she knew who he was. Anyone carried in a pavilion could only be noble-born. Did they hate him so much? No matter. He would put more of them in the dungeons if need be. Fear was a powerful motivator, and an even more powerful suppressor. Perhaps he would make an example of someone before taking them through the streets to drive home the message. But not for the next 20 days. Not even he had that power. How strange. What a quaint people with their quaint traditions. Traditions that were more powerful than monarchs, he realized. Only the naive believed they could truly be loved by all the populace. He knew this was impossible. Better to have the majority fear what you might do, and let the others kowtow to you. He cared little for the whims of the people under his control. Pulling a woman savagely to him, he drank from her lips deeply. Why not give them a show? She wrapped herself about him, and he allowed it to continue for another moment before breaking off abruptly. The onlookers gawked at him, and he smiled back to them. A raucous cheer emerged, but it didn't fully catch on. He held the smile in place as he looked down at his people. It never touched his eyes.